On the coldest morning ever recorded in Montana's history, John Miller's quiet winter morning turned into an unimaginable event. Outside his kitchen window, the thermometer displayed an unbelievable -40 degrees, while the bitter wind howled mercilessly through the mountain valley. However, it wasn't the record-breaking cold that caused John to drop his coffee mug. It was the sight that met his eyes through the frost-covered living room window. A massive grizzly bear, her fur crystallized with ice, stood upright against the glass. She wasn't aggressive, nor was she searching for food. Instead, she was deliberately knocking on the window with her enormous paw, creating a rhythmic pattern that seemed purposeful. Behind her, 3 small cubs huddled in the snow, their bodies trembling violently in the deadly cold. The smallest one suddenly collapsed, barely moving, its tiny frame sinking into the deep snow. The mother bear's response was something John had never imagined. She rushed to the fallen cub, gently lifting it in her powerful jaws before returning to the window. Her movements were deliberate, almost calculated, as she pressed her dying cub against the glass, as if pleading for John to understand. The wind howled louder, driving the temperature even lower, and frost formed on the cub's fur with frightening speed. The bear alternated between checking on her cubs and returning to the window, her actions increasingly frantic. She seemed desperate, her gestures eerily human-like. John watched in disbelief as the bear did something extraordinary. She sat back on her haunches, raised both paws in what could only be described as a prayer-like pose, and held them there. Her eyes locked onto his, filled with an intelligence that defied explanation. She was begging for help. The desperate plea. Another cub stumbled and fell, its strength failing in the brutal cold. The smallest one had already stopped shivering, a deadly sign that hypothermia had taken hold. The mother bear's desperation grew. She gathered snow in her paw and began making deliberate marks on the frosted window, movements so precise they resembled attempts at writing. Emergency alerts blared from John's phone, warning of even colder temperatures. The bear's urgency intensified. She picked up each cub in turn, showing them to John through the window, her actions screaming of a mother's desperation to save her children. In all his years living in Montana, John had never witnessed anything like this. Bears were supposed to be hibernating, not begging for help in the dead of winter. Whatever had driven this family from their den must have been catastrophic. As he stood frozen, watching the scene unfold, the mother bear pressed her paw against the glass, leaving a perfect print in the frost. Then she made a sound that wasn't a growl or roar. It was a sound that seemed to carry the weight of a plea. The second cub collapsed, and the mother's reaction stunned John. She scooped up her 2 fallen cubs, trying to warm them with her body, all while continuing to beg at the window. Her remaining cub pressed against her leg, its tiny whimper audible even through the thick glass. The mother bear's actions defied all natural laws. She alternated between warming her cubs and performing gestures that appeared purposeful. With slow, deliberate movements, she traced patterns in the snow with her paw, then pointed to her cubs in the window. The middle cub collapsed next, its strength finally giving out. The mother's reaction was immediate. She cradled both fallen cubs, huddling them against her body, while continuing to communicate with John. Her remaining cub made a soft sound, a cry for help that sounded eerily human. The turning point. The mother bear seemed to sense that time was running out. She laid her weakest cubs in the snow and approached the window one last time. Pressing her forehead against the glass, she raised both paws in that prayer-like gesture again. This time, her sound was filled with a depth of anguish that made John's chest tighten. Her movements grew even more deliberate. She pointed to John's door and mimed an opening motion with her paws before bowing her head in complete submission. It was a gesture so profound that John felt tears welling in his eyes. Driven by a force stronger than fear, John slowly approached the door. The mother bear's eyes followed his every move, filled with an impossible intelligence. When he finally opened the door just a crack, she didn't charge. Instead, she carefully picked up her weakest cub and, with deliberate steps, placed it just inside the threshold. She backed away, bowing her head again as if asking for permission. John stood frozen, trying to process what he was witnessing. The cub, nearly frozen, began to stir in the warmth of the house. Meanwhile, the mother bear pointed to her remaining cubs, then to the door. Her actions were so deliberate, so calculated, that John found himself nodding instinctively. John stood frozen in his doorway, the biting wind pulling at his jacket as he watched the extraordinary family vanish into the snow-covered forest. His mind raced with unanswered questions. What had driven these animals to seek refuge in his home? What did this mean for the way humans understood the intelligence and emotions of wildlife? The evidence of their visit was surreal. John's living room remained untouched, as if the bears had been the most polite guests he had ever hosted. The faint paw prints on the floor and the neatly folded blanket near the fireplace were the only signs that the encounter had not been a dream. Later that evening, John reviewed the footage from his security cameras. Every moment of the bear's actions had been captured in startling clarity. From the mother bear's desperate pleas to the respectful farewell at his door, the video was undeniable proof of their incredible behavior. When John uploaded the video online, it quickly became a global sensation. Wildlife experts, behavioral scientists, and ordinary viewers alike were stunned by the remarkable display. Heated debates erupted about what the mother bear's actions could mean. Was this an example of advanced animal intelligence, or had she simply acted on instincts misunderstood by humans? Media outlets clamored for interviews with John, and the story made headlines around the world. Experts analyzed every second of the footage, attempting to understand the motivations behind the bear's behavior. Some claimed it was a sign of evolving intelligence in wildlife, while others believed it highlighted how animals, when pushed to the brink, could adapt in extraordinary ways. John, however, remained focused on the emotional core of the encounter. For him, the mother bear's actions were not about survival alone, but about love, sacrifice, and a deep connection to her cubs. The look in her eyes, the deliberate movements, and her willingness to trust a human spoke volumes. The local community rallied around the story, with some people leaving supplies near heat property in case the bears returned. Wildlife organizations reached out to monitor the area and ensure the family's safety. The once quiet mountain valley became a hub of activity as researchers and journalists visited to understand the implications of this encounter. For weeks, John couldn't stop thinking about the family of bears. He often found himself gazing out the window, wondering if they had found a new den, if the cubs were growing stronger, and if he would ever see them again. Months later, on a quiet spring morning, something extraordinary happened. John was sitting on his porch, sipping coffee and enjoying the warm sunshine, when movement in the distance caught his eye. Emerging from the forest was the mother bear, her 3 cubs trailing behind her. They had grown considerably, their coats glossy and thick. Josh's heart raced as the family approached cautiously. The mother bear stopped a few yards from his porch, her eyes locking with his once again. She raised a paw in what seemed to be the same deliberate wave as before, a gesture of recognition and gratitude. The cubs mimicked their mother, standing tall and raising their paws. Tears welled in John's eyes as he returned the wave. The family lingered for a moment longer before retreating into the trees, leaving John with a sense of awe and a renewed respect for the mysterious, emotional world of wild animals. From that day forward, John knew he would never look at wildlife the same way again.